You're listening to The Fully Booked Therapist with Heather Hommel. This is the business coaching show for hands-on therapists who are done under-earning and ready to build a practice that pays them more than enough. Real conversations, real results, your real life. Let's get into it. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Fully Booked Therapist podcast. My guest today has spent over 40 years as a physical therapist, but his story takes some unexpected turns. With me today is Walt Fritz, who started out doing what most PTs do, helping people recover from pain and injury through hands-on care. But over time, he began questioning the explanations he had been taught, the narratives that most of his colleagues just accepted without too much pushback. That journey led him to develop his own approach to manual therapy, one that puts the patient's experience at the center rather than the clinician's expertise. Walt, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Heather. I spent some time on your website looking at some of the other podcasts, et cetera. And yeah, you've got a pretty interesting journey yourself. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us, what are your roots in? How did you get to become a physical therapist all the way up to what you do now?
Oh, God, you don't want to be bored with that entire story. But, I eventually made it through the University of Buffalo after 7 years of fumbling around there. And back then, back when I graduated, it was a bachelor's only profession. There wasn't even a master's in PT at the time in the mid 80s. And then later on, they added the master's and now it's a doctoral profession. And, back in the day, 85 was not particularly strong in evidence-based practice at all. In fact, it really hadn't been incorporated till a bunch of years later. So there was a lot of historical narrative type of things that we learn from, modalities like electric modality, all sorts of things. I know your background in myofascial release. We were introduced to myofascial release by one of our adjunct professors who had taken some work in MFR, but it was not allowed to be taught at the University of Buffalo. So she actually covered the windows of the door with paper so she could just sort of introduce it to us. And, it was cool. It didn't mean anything in that grand crush of university training, right? But during the first couple of years, I worked, as general hospital. I worked a lot of pediatrics and developmental disabilities. But then in the early 90s, got curious based on another therapist who we hired at an early intervention place I worked at to take some myofascial release and craniosacral work. And I really liked it. I gravitated toward the MFR. It was a little bit less constricted than the craniosacral approach. And, I kind of fell down the rabbit hole as a lot of us do. And, took everything quickly as soon as I could and, kind of figured out ways to incorporate it. That was in 1992. 1995, I started as a teaching assistant for John Barnes. And I think in your early teaching assistant days, you go get Diet Coke for him. And then once you work your way up the hierarchy, which I did over the 11 years to senior teaching assistant, I then told other people to go get the Diet Coke for John. So anyway, I learned a lot. I really learned a lot from John. I learned a lot, certainly the hands-on work. I learned a lot on seminar structure, which helped me immensely when I started my own line. I have a lot of gratitude toward John and what he taught. He and I didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, and that finally led to an undoing in 2006. But then I still like the work. And I know that's heresy to some myofascial release purists, and I get that all the time online, but it's a person's journey. And I kind of then sought other narratives. I saw people doing, and I'm making an assumption that I don't know if it's correct that you're an MFR therapist, but their explanation model was entirely different. And that really, really piqued my curiosity. How could you do the same work, but explain it from such different perspectives?
Yeah.
So I started sort of perusing those perspectives and narratives and saw that, the work works, but there's probably a lot more at play than what we think we're doing. And that sort of led me down this whole model of shared decision-making, right? What are the common denominators when we work with a patient? We think it's, we're working with their fascia, their muscle, or their posture, or their strength, whatever. But, that therapeutic relationship, that inclusion of the patient perspectives to me was one of the, okay, I'm going to coin or use one of John's terms, the missing link in therapy that we don't really, I don't think, put enough value on I'm honoring the therapeutic relation and working not to fracture that relationship. And I found a lot of evidence to support that from a lot of different perspectives, not just my PT or manual therapy or myofascial perspective, but that was a real turning point for me. And I'm out there teaching internationally now, not the way I used to work. Now I primarily teach to speech pathologists of all people.
Yeah.
Although I get a lot of PTs and massage therapists and other therapists at my classes, but it's a very narrowed range of perspective that I teach to now.
Very, very interesting. So your programs are called Foundations in Manual Therapy. Is that right?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about how did you get into the speech realm of things? I was actually recommended to interview you by one of my friends who I met at an MFR seminar, who is a speech and language person. And she was like, "Oh, I've taken some of Walt's classes. They're really, really good. You should look them up." So I, sure enough, looked you up and I was like, very, very interesting. I'll have to get you on my podcast. So it was a speech person who introduced me to piqued my curiosity about you.
Yeah. Well, the backstory on that introduction was it was just clinic time with the table, spending time working, and I don't know if you took the class, but the anterior cervical technique, where we move in and work with the cervical nerve roots, et cetera, et cetera. But as I was working with that with my patients, okay, so I have some pretty serious ADHD, which keeps me from maintaining focus, right? Tough thing to do. But as I was in here working with somebody's acknowledged neck or cervical radiculopathy, and I just started wandering around a little bit, and I started moving medially, which now I know now is behind the larynx. They started telling me things that I'd not heard from patients before. Gosh, you're replicating that feeling I get when I can't quite get a pill down, or, when my voice gets a little croaky or I get pressure in my throat. Things that I had never heard in my training and certainly in my education, because that's out of the scope of practice of a PT. So I started writing about that online with the big mouth that I have. And I ended up being read by a speech pathologist who passed my name on to someone who was teaching a one-of class in Chicago in 2013. She invited me and a physician from New York City who'd published a fair amount of research on using manual therapy for voice disorders to teach a one-of class in 2013. And it was rough. I thought it was rough, but people really appreciated it, enjoyed it. And I just, over the next couple of years, saw myself transitioning from, teaching that more general whole body approach, which I enjoy. That's what I do here in my clinic, into this more niche field. And since then, it's been like a new career for me. It offered me an opportunity to publish a book, to get a research article published, and, really gave me a lot of personal and professional satisfaction.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool to be invited to go to all these different places and teach to people around the world. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of like going back to that idea that the first time you taught or the first time you did a speech there, it was kind of rough, but the willingness to do it scared and to do it like unpolished and to, get it wrong before you get it right, I think is what opened up the door for you to have all these other options to look forward to, right? And ultimately write a book and get published.
Yeah.
That's a big deal, but it starts with the willingness to just kind of be the person with the loud mouth, be the person that asks the questions, be the person that's willing to kind of get picked on or whatever. I can only imagine what the journey has been like. Yikes.
It's been interesting.
Yeah. And to just keep going.
It also exposed me to, just like in our fields. Now, I apologize, Heather. Are you a PT, a massage therapist?
I'm a massage therapist. And then
Got it. Okay.
I too, I found John's work back in 2010 when my youngest was 1 year old and my husband had a failed back surgery and was very, very incapacitated. And my husband ended up getting huge results from sending him to Sedona for an intensive. And so I went all in and I took all the training and I practiced as an MFR therapist for about 15 years. But in the since 2020, I've just been coaching manual therapists, mainly MFR therapists, on businesses. So that's my background.
Yeah, because even in that class in 2013, I was exposed to clinicians who had learned a different form of manual therapy for voice disorders, and they call it laryngeal manipulation, and is literally grabbing hold of the larynx and pretty assertively, aggressively, kind of wrangling you from side to side. And the research shows, there's a really huge body of research that shows that's effective for treating voice disorders. But do we always have to be so aggressive, right?
Right.
It's a narrative that the public loves, and a lot of therapists thinks it's necessary to break things up. But much as we've learned in some of our mutual trainings, that can we do this in a different way without
Mhm.
having to put that patient on guard or threat, or putting them in that place of saying, gosh, I'm willing to accept whatever you need to do to help me, which is an incredibly vulnerable position that people put themselves in that place of trust.
Yeah.
I don't like being handed that much trust. I want the patient to have a voice for themselves. No pun intended with the voice work that I teach, but I want their voice to basically share an equal place as my voice, which is what shared decision making is all about. It's like me saying, Heather, this is something I've used on people in the past, and let's try it now. But what do you think? Does it feel helpful to you? Does it feel useful? Does it feel harmful? Is it a waste of time? I think I ask more from my patients than a lot of like MFR and similar therapists do, because I want them to speak up for themselves. I want them to tell me their story. I don't want them to trust me beyond, that minimal trust of, okay, you're an expert, but I want them to really have a voice in therapy that I never saw in my training.
I think too, like some of these things are just not meant to be taught in those environments, right? Like it's very skill focused, it's very technique focused. We're going to
Yep.
do this and this and this. And there's not really, and this is to no fault of different seminars or wherever you get your training at. It's just
Yeah.
the intention is like we're going to teach you these things and then you're going to magically go back to your office and you're going to have a successful practice. And nobody teaches the client journey or how do you actually talk to the client in order for them, like for you to understand their problem better than they do even, and then to give them a plan and options and have them agree to it and want what you have to offer and then go forward from there. That's kind of a lot of the work that I do with therapists. It's like, okay, you have all of your skill set. Now I'm going to help you make sure that that skill set works for your patients and that you get fully booked and you charge the rate that you need to charge. And it's a better experience for both ends of the spectrum there, the patient and the therapist, because that's really missing in like, you just can't teach it all. I'm sure you can't teach it in your therapy classes too. There's just not enough time to say, hey, and this is the journey of the client from when they first find you all the way till when they pay you.
Yeah. I had a therapist recently at a class I was teaching kind of stop me and say, you're teaching us the soft skills that we're expected to know, but nobody really lays them out and teaches them. And, I felt really good about hearing that because
Yeah.
I know there's enough research to say that aspect of the therapeutic relationship, the soft skills are incredibly meaningful, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
There's a real cool paper that I like to reference frequently. And even though it's more for the speech pathology, that's the way it was written, I think it's broadly applicable. And it
Yeah.
was written by a speech pathologist, PhD from the University of Pittsburgh. And it's about metatherapy, the concept of metatherapy, that in essence, we think it's the technique that's most impactful, how we apply it correctly, the direction, all those things. And that's sort of how we're taught this work. But what this researcher, Leah Halou, is talking about, we got to take a look at the meta on how we present that technique.
Yeah.
She did her research basically looking at a new speech pathologist, a newly graduated speech pathologist who was working with a voice disorder. And the clinician applied the technique properly. And it just happened to be a technique called lip trills, basically. And they use it in the context of voice disorders. She observed the new clinician using the technique, and she did it absolutely correctly. But then she observed a more seasoned clinician applying the same intervention. And that person got better outcomes, clinically measurable outcomes. So what she looked at was what was the difference, right? They both used the tool identically, but she looked at how the person presented it, the context, the grounding that she placed it, which comes from experience, from mentoring, from feedback, right? It's that meta that to her is at least equally impactful as the technique and maybe even more. And I think, people in our shared lines of work get so caught up in the technique as being the most pivotal piece that they forget about the grounding at the meta that surrounds it. And I think that's a lot of what I teach is the meta, or as this person called, the soft skills.
I love that. And I think it's great for therapists to come out of a training and feel like they can go back to their treatment rooms and get the same results as were shown at the seminar, right? and that they can be with their patients in a way where the patient understands that you're there to help them. And I think that's also something that's missing is how often we say, I can help you with this. And we believe we can. And we also believe that the client can get better, the patient can get better, not just because we're going to put our hands on them, but because of the collection of the whole experience that they're going to have with us when they're in our treatment space.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, do you still treat patients? Do you mainly teach nowadays? Like, what does your day to day look like?
No, I'm sort of splitting my time. I'm part-time here in my office. I'm in upstate New York in
Okay.
a little rural village about a half hour south of Rochester. And I see patients usually 3 days a week. I don't try and book a real heavy schedule. I'm fine with, kind of a lighter schedule. I get to walk to work in the morning and it's kind of pleasant. And then, yeah, I travel and I teach US and internationally. That really keeps me busy. So, at age 66, I still feel like I have something to offer and want to keep doing it both to keep my hands here on patients, not just the head to toe stuff, but I also get a lot of referrals for the specific work that I teach. But I just love sharing it. I really do. And I love learning more about different cultures and peoples and diagnosis and everything, a lot of fun.
Mhm. Do you have a favorite place you love to go to teach?
That's a hard one. I get asked that question a lot for a lot of different reasons. I love teaching in Hong Kong. I teach there quite often, and it's chaos and it's crazy, and I love it. Japan was unreal in terms of the gentleness of souls, but I was just in Istanbul that was fantastic. And I could go on and on about each different country. And if you're listening from another country that I taught to, don't feel dismissed, but I don't know. It's just a fascinating journey because, whether I'm teaching in Istanbul or Toledo, Ohio, it's still and I didn't mean to dismiss Toledo if you're listening there, but it's that sense of, okay, here's some people who are actually paying you money to learn from you. And that's a huge honor. It's also a huge responsibility that, you really do need to uphold. And to me, that mission has probably veered away from a lot of my, well, no, not probably, but has the MFR background is really having a good grounding in mutually accepted evidence, not rabbit hole evidence.
Mhm. Tell me a little more. Like, what is mutually accepted evidence? Like, let's go down that rabbit hole.
Okay, so if we take a piece of evidence that we might have learned in myofascial release, the piezoelectric effect, that when you actually go outside and talk to scientists, they'll kind of scratch their heads and say, well, that's not really applicable to fascia. It's meant for bone remodeling, right? And I'm not saying that it's totally incorrect, but there's a distortion of evidence that's often used, and not just myofascial release, but a lot of therapy, a lot of settings where they'll take a piece of evidence and then bend it a bit to sort of fit the narrative they're trying to teach.
Mhm.
And it's understandable. We all have our own biases that we try and support every day. We accept certain evidence and we don't accept other evidence. Is it because it's not valid? No, because it conflicts with our biases. But I think sometimes those conflicting biases, that evidence really is informational for us. And what I've tried to do is find evidence to support the broadness of the work, not to keep reinforcing it's all about the fascia, but what we do is we touch people. We touch another human being, whether it's fascia or skin or muscle or nerve.
It's a human being.
Exactly. And that includes psychosocial components that, I think really deserve a lot of attention. I believe having a multiple different views on evidence allows you to move beyond that single story that you were taught, whether it's fascia or craniosacral or anything. And it gives you a broader sense, which is not just about expanding your understanding, but by taking some of those seemingly more disparate pieces of evidence, sometimes they're really helpful to work with the individual. Not everybody believes that it's their fascia, right? So what do you do with that person? Do you try and convince them? I got a lovely study that was done by a researcher by the name of Petoskey. And I sent you all of these if you want to share them in your.
Yep, we'll share them in the show notes. Yeah.
Absolutely. But basically, they said, well, taking a look at patient beliefs and that patient beliefs are probably not as moldable as we think, right? They come in and they want to know our story. Well, tell me about fascia. Tell me about the craniosacral system. Tell me about this, or that. And they nod a lot and they start sort of parroting our words. But at the root of things, have we really changed their mind?
And do we need to?
Exactly. And is it in our best interest to try to change their minds? Because there's also some really good evidence on what happens when we fracture the therapeutic alliance. We lose that sense of trust. And if I try and stomp on your beliefs too hard, I may lose you, not totally as a patient, but I'm losing that sense of trust and belief that a patient gives us. So I personally believe that having this broader sense of understanding of the underpinnings of everything that we do, not just what we think we're doing with our hands, but what we know we're doing within our human being, I believe those give us a stronger chance to help people in the long run.
Yeah. And then people don't check out, right? Like, I think clients really, bottom line, patients want us to say they want to know that you can help them.
Yeah.
Outside of that, they don't really need to understand unless they've asked to have a deeper understanding what it is that we're doing and why it works. They don't always need that piece. They're not as interested in it as we are as the therapists because we're nerds. Like, we love this stuff. We can nerd out about it all day long. But I know, like, even for my own therapy, like going in, I want to just experience it and have the work done and have the results of the work. I don't want a dissertation of how smart you are and how well trained you are or any of that really, because it doesn't change my outcome.
Yeah.
I want to get to the meat. So
I had a really interesting experience a couple of years ago with a patient who had done some extensive therapy sessions with a craniosacral therapist. And for whatever reason, she stopped seeing that person and came to see me, and it was all TMJ pain, right? So I explained my style of work, and we spent the first session with me. I'm a lot of work as a therapist. I ask a lot of questions because I work from your responses. And, we were doing the standard pterygoid work, right? That a lot of your listeners or viewers are familiar with. And we went in there and I'm asking, are we connecting? Does this feel familiar? Am I connecting with that issue? Does it feel helpful? All the typical things that I ask. So we spent the session and finished it up and, we were kind of checking out. And I said, how do you feel? She said, my jaw feels really good. Can I make another appointment? It's like, what am I going to do? Say no? So she came back a week or two later and I asked her to sort of sum up what happened between that last session and today. She said, well, that was really good work on the jaw, and the jaw is so much better, but I really didn't like the way you worked.
oh, interesting.
What is it that you didn't like? She said, you talk too much.
Okay.
You wouldn't let me go deep into my processing. You kept interrupting that. Now, I would beg to differ a little bit with that, but I wasn't going to, interfere with that. That she felt like she was so used to that sort of silent, quiet approach, so she could really go in and process, et cetera, which you and I are both familiar with. She felt that it wasn't what she was looking for. So I asked her, would you like me to stay quiet today? And she said, yeah, I would. So I did. I hated it, but I did it. And, I had to work from memory. I had to work from my own experience, right? We're looking for stuff. We know that, right? And, we finished up the sessions. I was bored stiff, but that's beyond, it wasn't about me. It was about her. And then we were done. And I said, so tell me about this session. Was this session better? And she said, no, you never found the right spot. And it's like, okay, maybe, can we next time, if there's a next time, can we find a place to meet in the middle? Because me asking you those questions is directed toward me finding those spots that you feel are relevant, important, useful, productive, right?
Yeah.
And she got it right then. That full silence maybe wasn't a benefit that she thought it was.
Maybe just too much the other direction.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So we both basically redirected the ship to say, can we meet in the middle? And it was a good experience for me too, to check in more often. Am I being a pest to you? Because a lot of people say, not at all. You're the first person who's really valued what I think. And I'll put it on my grave that I think this is important stuff, that I want my patient to feel like they are heard. Not just because I'm intuitive and can read their body and their tissues and all those things. I want them to feel really heard and listened to. And that's the way I go about it.
Mm-hmm. Did that patient ever come back for a third time?
Yeah. She's kind of a regular patient. Like, we get her jaw issue has resolved, but she likes what we do, and she is a patient of mine now. Yeah.
I think that's such a good example too of like being willing to be wrong with our patients, like get it wrong, like do what they ask and still get it wrong and still have someone like be unsatisfied, dissatisfied with the treatment and not make it about us. Be like, okay, how can I make this better for you? Like, can we try it this way? Because this is also better for me. And it's okay for it to also be good for the therapy. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay for it to be, like you said, like that meeting in the middle or that middle ground. So
Yeah.
I love that. And I love that she came back and she gets awesome results.
She did. And it allowed her to see, maybe a different perspective, just like I was seeing her perspective from the ground, So that's good stuff.
Who would you say are like the best fit Like, what kind of personality do people have that do well with foundations in manual therapy? Like, who are these people? What are their backgrounds?
Do you mean clinicians who take the work or patients
Yeah,
who?
the clinicians, because that's the people that are listening to this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speech pathologists are tend to be a little bit different lot. I call two. I'm going to break people up into two groups: centrists and fringers. Okay,
Yeah.
centrists, especially in evidence-based perspectives, like PT, speech pathology, where you're expected to work from an evidence-based perspective. The interpretation of evidence can be incredibly literal and narrow. There's
Right.
centrists. But then there's fringe people. And I recognize myself as a fringe person based on my background and maybe all my experiences. But I recognize that when people come to the class, they're probably already more on the fringe, willing to say, as a profession, we don't typically do manual therapy, even though we're licensed to do it and it's in our literature, but we're not taught it. Fringers are like, yeah, I've seen that research and I'm curious. Centrists tend to have a more narrow view of that. And it's not that you can't at times convert a fringe or a centrist, right? But I don't try and convert anybody. Like if they're not really catching on to my model, fine, thanks for being here. But I think it's the fringe people who really can see themselves as having a bit more flexible attitude versus, that really strict interpretation. But I think I don't want to exclude massage therapists because I think there's a lot of massage therapists who really get stuck in the mantra of, only what they were taught in school. And 500 hours is not a lot of time to really broaden the perspective. And, my favorite example is the anterior cervical work, right? MTs come out of school saying, no, that's a danger triangle. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
I respect Susan Salvo incredibly in terms of the work that she does and the textbooks that she writes. But her and I have a lot of discussions on, is it okay? Is it not okay? Because I teach anterior cervical work, but I teach it from a very, number one, a biologically plausible perspective. I teach it from a very medically, anatomically inclined perspective and a very patient-centered focus, right? So again, you've got fringers and centrists in your profession as well. So yeah, I think it's more the fringers, but sometimes it shocks me. I get people who are, PhD university people who are loving this model of, okay, people think they came to see me to learn manual therapy techniques, which is true. But what I really hope they leave with is an understanding of shared decision making, not just for manual therapy, but for exercise, for education, for things like that. Greater inclusion of patient perspectives, which is part of the evidence-based mandate.
So, say someone's listening to this for the first time, they've never heard of you, and they go to your website, they look you up. What do you recommend? Like, they're interested in adding your information to their portfolio. What do they do first? Like, what do you recommend first? Is there a first class they should take? Is there an
Yeah.
order that you
Yeah.
do it in? How does that work?
So just to be clear, about 4 years ago now, I stopped teaching my sort of whole body perspective class in person. I transitioned that to an online format. I still love that work, but it was just my heart wasn't in it, right? So, a lot of people, they're really drawn to that right away. They'll recognize elements of myofascial release, et cetera, but they're also going to see how I sort of build in that patient directed model too. I do things in ways that clinicians that are really strict MFR therapists, centrists say, well, that's not MFR.
Mhm.
But for my in-person classes, I don't have a lot of offerings. It's an intro and advanced class, and I don't teach many advanced classes. Speech pathologists are very different than I would say MTs and PTs are, that you and I have a tendency maybe to find something you really like and then work the hierarchy, that tiered level to become an
We want to be expert in it. We want to go all the way and tell me everything. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And it's a very different perspective. Not that speech pathologists don't have those tiered trainings, they do. But I found that most are really comfortable with one class and then just going out and doing it. And so my intro class is really the one that I recommend. And I honestly, Heather, I get a lot of massage therapists coming. Sometimes it's because they've heard of my approach and they just want to know it. Some because, I get massage therapists who are working with performers, vocal performers, or other things like that. So they have a niche interest, right?
Yeah.
Some are coming for, maybe just because they need the CEUs and I came to town. We know that model, right?
Sure. I was going to ask you a question about that, about CEUs.
Yeah.
Do all of your offerings come with CEUs, or is it just a certain class?
Yeah, no. So I'm universally approved by NCBTMB, which includes the New York sponsored program.
Awesome.
There's a couple massage therapists in Florida need CE broker, which is a big pain in the butt. And sometimes I'll get them approved if I'm doing a class in Florida.
Yeah.
I also have approval, obviously, for speech pathologists and some PT and OT CEUs. But yeah, all my classes, whether they're online or in person, are approved for massage therapists as well as some other professions.
That's really great because that's not true across the board with a lot of trainings. And sometimes it's kind of not really like marketed, like, hey, you're not getting CEUs for this. You're getting a certificate, but you read the certificate and there's like no CEUs on it, you know?
Yeah. But what's interesting too, though, is sometimes I'll people who come literally the words out of their mouth, or I don't care about the CEUs, I want to learn this, right? And to me, that's actually, well, it's nice when both exist.
I think it's nice when both exist or when it's very explicit that they do or they do not.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm teaching to a very niche market, but I still think we can give them, what we all need to do to renew our licenses and everything. We got to be mindful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that you have the model where you have recorded all of your basic classes or, the stuff that you came up with originally, and it's recorded. So it's available forever. Like that will never die. That's always going to be available, which is so smart and so well needed so that when the guru dies, everything doesn't die with them,
Exactly. I also started a model that probably a lot of people from a marketing perspective or business perspective would frown on. I give away a lot of free content to people who've taken my seminars. For instance, I have a private Facebook group that's reserved only for people who took the training online or in person. But every class for the last almost 4 years now, we record all of the lab sessions, my demos, right? And in every class, we then upload it to the Facebook group. So people who have taken the class have not only a record of what they learned in the class that they took, but they have 30, 40 other classes to compare that to. And to me, that's like this built-in learning library that's there forever, as long as Facebook or I'm still, whatever. But I think that's the support that people really thrive on. And I know that, and I don't mean to dismiss people who do it. You can easily charge for that sort of thing. I just told to give it, as a value added thing.
Yeah.
But a Facebook group for people taking a seminar is not a unique thing. We both know that, right? What kind of value can you add, right? I think there's a lot of things. I believe strongly in the evidence, and I share a lot of full text papers on there so people can maybe broaden that understanding of what it is we're doing, not just with the tissues, but with the human being. So yeah, I think it's important to record that and, for posterity. But I also believe in that sharing model to give back, so to speak.
That's really great. And then your therapists are able to learn and relearn and check and make sure that things are going well. So that's great.
Because every class, like we might even get somebody, okay, we're doing the pterygoid work, right? We might, in one class though, we might get somebody who's coming up, somebody from the audience who actually has some TMJ related issues, clicking, popping. In the next class though, we might get somebody who's got head and neck cancer fibrotic related trismus. Trismus is the limited opening in the mouth, but it's a very different scenario when it's radiation induced, right? So the technique is the same, but the context is different. And that's what I really, expose people to. It's like, okay, we're just sticking our finger in the same spot, but it's the meta that surrounds that becomes important.
Yeah, it's totally different.
And when you can witness it from those different perspectives, it's like, yeah, that might add value to the next clinical encounter you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to tell me a little bit about the book you wrote? What is it called? What's in it?
Yeah. So hang on, let me grab it. I just happen to have a copy handy here.
I love that for us.
All right. So I'm going to make what is going to be a very unusual request. Don't buy my book.
Okay.
Don't buy my book. And right now, okay, I don't want to get into too much detail, but right now I'm in a legal battle with the publisher.
Oh, bummer.
Because I've never gotten paid a cent for it. So right now we're trying to wrestle the rights free so I can then self-publish it. So there's a little caveat. For those of you who did purchase the book, thank you, because I know a lot of people have, but I'm hoping to get it so I actually get paid for writing the damn thing.
How long has it been out?
It came out in early 2023. So
okay.
3 years now.
Congratulations on getting a book out. I've written 2 books and I've self-published them. So maybe that was the best idea ever.
Well, I'm going to self-publish them, once I get it, or when I am forced to rewrite it if I can't get the rights back. But basically, it's a real solid grounding in not just tissue-based models, right? But it's solid grounding in psychosocial approaches to human interactions and therapeutic interactions. It goes pretty deeply into that. But then, then there's a whole 2/3 of the book is technique, if you will, right? Techniques they're pretty easy to pick up from YouTube or books or anything. But until you have a way to ground it, right?
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of things we do with our hands, but it's context we need to learn. I mean, I learned a lot from writing the book. Simultaneous with writing the book, during COVID, when everything shut down and you went to online practice right in terms of your coaching, which was very smart, I had a lot of time on my hands. Patient canceled. All my seminars were canceled. So I was offered a hybrid master's degree opportunity from the University of Wales in the UK. And I'd never gone beyond a bachelor's because it was never required. But what I was offered was a hybrid model that allowed me to take my teaching content and run it through an academic lens. So basically, my entire master's degree was taking my teaching content and elevating it to what would be viewed as an evidence-based academic content.
Mm-hmm.
And that included a final master's degree paper that, or study that I did, basically that it helped me learn a lot. So along with writing the book, at the same time, I was doing the degree. So a lot of that rolled into the writing of the book. And it also gave me the opportunity to write a paper. And the paper
Awesome. I was going to ask you about that next. So tell us about your paper.
In the speech pathology, the ear, nose, and throat physician surgeon perspective, laryngeal manipulation has been in place since 1980. It's an old accepted modality, but they're all talking about it. Even in 2026 research, I call it the what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas perspective. They talk about there's too much muscle tension right here causing a voice disorder. We need to get in and manipulate this to reduce the tension so this person speaks more clearly. Now, they're talking about it from a muscle tension perspective as well as the remediation of it from a local perspective. And my paper is all about saying, in the outside manual therapy literature, we've really moved on, or at least some people have, understanding that every event, every intervention is multifactorial, but yet you're still talking about Las Vegas as if everything happens there. So all this paper it's an opinion article that I was invited to write for a journal. It's just sort of updating that narrative with a challenge to researchers in the ear, nose, and throat field and speech pathology field to sort of up their game.
Yeah.
All right. One of my favorite studies, and I don't want to chew up too much of your time here, but there's a researcher by the name of Nelson Roy, his speech pathologist PhD out of the University of Utah. And he is the most prolific author when it comes to looking at laryngeal manipulation for muscle tension dysphonia, voice disorders. And in 2019, he did a study where they took a woman with muscle tension dysphonia. It's basically hoarseness, okay? And they slid her in an MRI and they gave her a script to read. And what they did was while she was reading the script, they were imaging her brain. Muscle tension dysphonia is known to have a very typical dysregulated brain activity pattern. And what they witnessed was when she was reading it, they saw that sense of dysregulation in brain activation. So they pulled her out of the machine. They did an hour equivalent of treatment, laryngeal manipulation, laryngeal reposturing, et cetera, et cetera. And once she was able to achieve a more normal voice, they slid her back in the MRI and they gave her the same script to read, and they recorded the new her. And what they saw was nearly an entirely different brain recording, MRI recording. She went from dysregulated to regulated. Her brain had reorganized in that short period of time to basically be able to speak in a normal way. And his point in that study was not to say the problem's not here, it's up here. It was to me that this is a human nervous system.
You can't separate it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, you and I do not have access to MRI, et cetera. But to me, that's how a lot of our research should be done, with tangible, concrete evidence, not taking an old story and just continuing it on in a study just to reinforce your biases, which, whether it's MFR research or manual therapy research in general, there's just too much clinging to the past of things that were never really validated but happened to get published decades ago, right?
Right.
And anyway, that's sort of been, and he's one of my heroes when it comes to research, because when I read his papers from the early 90s, he was talking about what's happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. But he evolved into seeing this as a central nervous system based not only disorder, but as well as treatment response.
Yeah. Well, and I think true leaders, especially, leaders in research, need to be willing to get it wrong. Like, we have to put ourselves out there to do the work that we do and be willing to be wrong and be willing to adjust our narratives and be willing to say, like, because I do this in coaching all the time. I'm like, I said this like last year, my perspective on this has changed after coaching hundreds of people now on this. Like, this is what I would say now, and having the grace for yourself and to be willing to just say, hey, I'm wrong, or I would do it differently now, I think is so important in all aspects of leadership, and especially when we're teaching people.
It is. And as well as taking what you've learned from someone or whoever, whatever, and accepting that you may not totally agree, you may not totally follow that model, but we learn from each person we train with. We learn from each patient, some of it good, some of it bad stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I think without that sense of the ability to evolve, we end up just being sort of parroters of the people who taught us.
Mm-hmm. So you got to make it your own and you got to chew the meat, leave the bones behind, leave what doesn't work for you behind.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know, like, where should people find you? Like, what's the best course of action for people to take? Where can they connect with you? Where can they find information about your classes and your book and all
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. I'm at waltfritz.com, super easy to find.
that? Okay.
You won't find my website anymore in my book. You can still find it on Amazon. It's still for sale there for now.
Okay. Well, we didn't even say the name of it, so we'll keep it secret until it comes out
Yeah,
again.
it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, it's not exactly hard to find, but and again, if somebody really wants to purchase it, I'm not going to say don't, but I would love them to not give that publisher any more pennies. So, but yeah, finding me on the website. But I mean, I'm kind of all over social media. I'm a big mouth, and whether it's promotional stuff, but also I think content is important, right? And it could be content applicable to the classes I teach or the type of work I do. But I also think there's so much good research that's coming out in all of our fields that deserve sharing. And I love that sort of more general approach, not the niche stuff. How many times have you heard that, okay, somebody's in pain, you just need to get stronger so you can better support yourself, right? I mean, it's a common narrative.
Right. Well, and isn't that what like PTs used to always just do is prescribe exercise and watch you exercise as you just make yourself tighter and tighter and tighter and weaker and weaker and weaker?
Well, I'll beg to differ with that one because there's actually a study that says exercise and strengthening is actually pretty effective for improving range of motion. But there's also some really good stuff out there saying that the acquisition of strength has almost nothing to do with why we feel less pain. It's all the other mediators that happen, the neurophysiological aspects of movement, of strengthening, of exercise, that are the reason, not because we need to get stronger. But let's apply that same filter to manual therapy, the myofascial release, right? We say that, until you release your fascia, nothing will ever change. Are we sure we're releasing fascia? Sure, we're told that. But manual therapy, myofascial release has so many other factors at play besides just what we think we're doing to the fascia. And by omitting all those, I think we're doing ourselves and our patients a disservice. And that's kind of what the drum I'm beating is. I'm not saying stop believing what you do or what you were told, but at least, look beyond that story. Don't stay in that vacuum of your training, or you're going to really cheat yourself and your patients in the long run.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes, like I tell my therapists, who are the good majority of them are MFR therapists, we're expanding that now, but sometimes people need something else. Sometimes this doesn't work for them. And you have to be willing to see when enough is enough, and you need to be able to refer out. It's necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we hear this all. Oh my gosh, you're my last resort. I've tried everything,
and it's not true. Like they think that it's their last resort, but
it's not true. Don't put me up on that pedestal, and don't put yourself in that place of this is the last chance. If this doesn't help you, let's see what else might.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of this goes counter to what a lot of people are taught, how they should speak, etc. But you know what? There's more than one way to address the concerns that our patients have.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think never stop learning, right? Expand your mind, read books, see what else is out there. It's okay to be expert in lots of things. And you don't even have to be extra or expert. Like I'm extra, but like there's a lot of things you can learn.
Yeah.
I'm learning things every day. I like to read things, expose myself to different viewpoints, and be willing to change and think new things and experience new experiences. And
yeah. Can I go off on another story here?
Let's go. Get it.
So a bunch of years ago, I was kind of engaged in an online roundtable discussion where the challenge was placed, Heather, if you had to pick one piece of research, one piece of evidence, one body of work to ground your approach to whatever that is, what would it be? And it's really tough to pin it to one study or something like that. Don't get me wrong. But it was an interesting thought experiment. And it was basically manual therapists engaged in this. And it was online. So you basically took your turn and somebody presented a paper and talked about it a little bit. And it was interesting how people talked about that. And when it came time for me, I presented a paper that was older than me. I presented a paper not by a physical therapist or massage therapist, by a psychotherapist. It was a 1957 paper written by Carl Rogers, psychotherapist Carl Rogers. In 1957, when I read the historical accounts at the time, reading this paper at a conference got him ostracized from his profession. And since I was ostracized from the myofascial release community, it's like, yeah, go, Carl. But anyway, what he was talking about was the prevailing belief at the time in psychotherapy in 1957, what the successful remediation of a mental health disorder was hinged upon the choice of the right modality.
Yeah.
Sound familiar? Right? And that was the prevailing belief, that with a certain kind of disorder, you need to pick the right tool. And what Rogers was saying in this paper was the choice of modality is so much less important than the relationship that we build. Now, it was before the term therapeutic relationship was coined, so he had other words that he used to describe it. But he was basically saying it almost doesn't matter what tool you use. If you build that therapeutic relationship and nurture it and don't fracture it, that's the key to successful outcomes. And to me, I look back historically on that, and it's like, it's still true today in the manual therapy communities. I mean, that's what modality empires sell you, that this is the modality. And for a lot of people, it is, don't get me wrong. But I love Rogers' underlying construct that you still need to have that therapeutic relationship, that sense of understanding each other and listening, I think are those soft signs that we started this talk out with that a lot of times go unspoken.
Yeah. And it, leaves like a sense of, I think, unrest in the treatment room for the therapist when they don't have those soft skills. Their clients leave without rebooking. They leave it up to the client to decide if they're coming back or not without any guidance, right? We leave it up to the client to do all the heavy lifting. So yeah, soft skills are very important, and it gives you a better enjoyment in the treatment room too as the therapist, and the client likes it better too.
Yeah.
They're going to get treated better. So all right. Well, I really appreciate your time. This has been a great interview. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I did include a lot of other papers in those attachments I sent you. And, for the curious reader, I think you'll find a lot of information on that. Some of it may be a little bit disconcerting because it conflicts with what you've been taught. But I think that's where growth happens. If we're not challenging ourselves, we're not growing. And sometimes challenging ourselves means you got to read works that conflict with what you've experienced and been taught and believe. So lots of things in there that I think people can find helpful, and maybe it's just a bunch of garbage and you don't want to hear it. By the way, there's one paper by McParlin, 2022 by McParlin, that to me, and again, this is heresy, to me better explains why people, when we touch, why they sometimes have a memory, why they sometimes go back into the past. McParlin calls it their priors. It's not saying that fascial memory story is completely wrong, but at least expose yourself to other understandings of how touch can initiate a memory, an emotion, a feeling. She uses a concept called synchrony.
Okay.
She says when the toucher and the touchee are in synchrony and we create that sense of connection, that's when they can then process. And look what we're doing in myofascial release. We're touching. We're touching in a way that we do something that, I love that word synchrony, without it being too esoteric, that I do something that to you, Heather, it's like, oh, whatever you just did, that's good in whatever way that is. And again, it's just giving, instead of just one story, it adds another plausible story from a neuroscience and a psychological perspective.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay. So for everyone that is very curious about these studies and these research papers, they will all be linked in the show notes. So just keep scrolling until you find the links. We'll link it all out. So thanks for providing that for us.
Absolutely. And if anybody has questions or comments or complaints or wants to throw things at me through the email, go ahead and do it. Just contact me through my website. I love talking about this stuff. I love being challenged. And in a lot of ways, I love challenging people.
All right. Well, we've enjoyed being challenged today. We liked it a lot. Thank you for coming on the podcast, and hopefully we'll see you around.
Absolutely. And thanks for your time and the invitation, and good luck in the future for you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for spending this time with me today. If you're a hands-on therapist who is ready to get fully booked and build a practice that actually pays you, I want to help you do that. Head over to heatherhummel.com to find out how we can work together. And if you loved this episode, please share it with someone who needs it. See you next week.